What is going on YouTube? Kvaris here, and welcome back to another PSO2 video. So today we're actually going to be going over all the new skills that we should be receiving in the Kvaris update, which as of right now is about 4 days away. Before we jump into that though, if you're new to the channel, my name is Kvaris. I cover primarily PSO2 content. Would much appreciate a subscriber as we work our way towards that 10k mark. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this. So I opted to do this video specifically in this format. I did go over all of the skills with my Twitch channel. If you guys want to see that, I made a highlight over on the Twitch channel itself. I'll leave a link in the video description to that. But I wanted to do a bit more of a structured video this time around to kind of contrast with how I did my Everything Kvaris video to see kind of which one fits the channel a little bit better. Let me know what you guys like, let me know what you didn't like about it, and we'll make adjustments as we move forward. But the overall idea is to level up the Twitch content, or the YouTube content, while, maintaining the Twitch content. It's going to be a little bit more difficult, but I think it's going to be worth it if you guys enjoy this. Anyway, enough stalling, streamer. Let's go ahead and start. So we're going to start out with the quintessential main class itself, Hunter. Hunter got some pretty good skills. We're going to go over them each one by one, talk about what I like, what I don't like, what I think is kind of being, or the idea behind the skill itself, and just my initial thoughts. So to start things out, we have Hunter Physique Short Cycle. So what this is going to do is reduce the effect duration of Hunter Physique, but also shorten its cooldown time. So the game tends to favor skills with a shorter cooldown overall. Essentially, since combat is so dynamic, you really don't know what a target is going to do at all times, unless you're like a really high tier speedrunner that's doing the same run over and over again. Realistically, an enemy is going to have a slew of attacks they can do. With having shorter cooldowns, you can actually factor for this a bit easier. Certain optimizations or certain moments might be available more often, and these abilities don't need to be up for as long, but they could be up more often overall. So this is a trend that we're going to see with a lot of skills. The first thing I think we saw this skill with, or the first time we saw this trend specifically with, would have been a braver skill. I believe it was Brave Spirit? No. Brave Combat is the name of the skill. And it has a skill point you can add into it to make it a shorter duration, but a shorter cooldown. Meaning you tend to have it up more often, and you tend to have more opportunities to use it. So this is something that you're actually going to see quite a bit in these skills, and I'm a fan of it. I think it's actually a good change. Honestly, it's fairly rare you need to have Hunter Physique up for a long amount of time. Usually it's just like a short burst of a specific interaction with the boss where Hunter Physique would be really nice, or if you're going to burst on a target and you want to make sure you're uninterrupted for that small amount of burst, it's nice to have in those situations. So I think this is pretty much on track to be a fantastic change overall. So next up we have Sword Art's Overcharge. Now this feels like it completes a playstyle that they seem to be crafting for Hunter's sword. It goes along with the other abilities a Hunter has. So essentially Hunter has something called Photon Art's Avenger, where if you use a Photon Art or it unleashes at the same time as a enemy comes into contact for an attack with you, you do increase damage, you're not knocked back from it. Basically it's like a counter attack at the same time. Now, they recently got an ability, actually the last set of skills that we got allowed hunters to be able to charge skills, basically any PAs that did charge would essentially be released immediately if it came into contact with damage, allowing them to get their extra damage itself, though at the cost of maybe not getting the full charge of the PA. So realistically speaking, it was still more important to kind of time things properly for you overall, hopefully getting that full charge when necessary, but it's not always going to be something that can happen. Now we have Sword Art's Overcharge, basically providing you extra potency for a set amount, or for charging a PA up to a set amount of time, basically overcharging the PA. So say you're in a situation where you charge a PA, but nothing comes into contact with you, you can't let go of it when it's at its maximum charge. Now you have even more of a charge to increase its potency, maybe possibly run into a situation where you can get an Avenger with an extra amount of time. If not, you just at least get extra potency. So it just kind of rounds out that overall playstyle of the charge and the Photon Art's Avenger and all of those things combined. So moving on to Partisan Attack Extra, basically just gives you an extra normal attack on your Partisan normals. It's not super interesting. I mean, it's cool, I guess, and it's welcome, as well as it brings it up to snuff with more or less every other weapon that the class itself has. But you'll notice there's this trend of certain weapons getting interesting mechanics, while other weapons just feeling like they're being brought up in line with the weapons that are alongside it. So this seems to be one of those changes in my opinion. Not really amazing, but not terrible either. Next we have Wired Anchor Strike Back. Essentially, you have a weapon action that allows you to perfect parry an ability coming at you. This essentially is going to give you the damage of a Hunter Arts Avenger applied to the next photon art you use, which is really nice considering that you had a perfect parry, but it didn't really do anything when you use that perfect parry. It essentially just stopped damage from coming at you like that. And then of course, since your weapon action already kind of slung you towards your target and did some damage, it wasn't really like something that it didn't feel like it wasn't a parry in a sense, but it wasn't really a parry at the same time because you weren't getting increased damage from it. So it was kind of a bit of a mixed bag. At least now you're being rewarded for pulling off that perfect parry. Very, very comfortable. Very, very nice. It is going to be interesting to see is if you perfect parry into a PA specifically that you already proc Hunter Arts Avenger with, because there's incoming damage coming towards you, does it then apply the extra Arts Avenger damage? Does it apply it on the PA following it? Because we do have certain, attacks in game or certain abilities in game that do bank the benefit. Specifically, I'm thinking of Knuckles, where if you sway a Knuckle normal or you sway a Knuckle attack coming in towards you, you get that extra attack afterwards. So we can bank that and come back to it later. Maybe it works like that, or it's a situation where it just overwrites it overall. Hopefully it's something that does increase overall damage and it doesn't really like punish you, or I guess not really provide you a benefit for getting something extra, but we'll have to see how it works out. And that more or less wraps up Hunter. Not super fantastic. I mean, the Sword Arts Overcharge is great in my opinion, and Hunter Physique Short Charge is a fantastic change, but the other two aren't super amazing. Like, I'm kind of lukewarm on Partisan and Wired Anchor Strike Back. We need to get some testing in game to really find out more about it. Next we've got Fighter. Fighter is actually probably my second favorite class in the game, so I'm pretty excited to see what these skills are going to bring to the table. Overlord Short Charge Cycle is the first one we've got here. This one's a bit more interesting than the usual, lower cooldown for reduced effects duration. It also says it increases the damage you take. Now, I'm not sure if this is a translation thing because this skill already increases the damage you take. I'm not sure if they mean increase it even more, if they're just saying this still increases the damage you take for that period of time, or what have you. We'll have to see when we get in game. If it increases it more, kind of scary, maybe not worth it, because realistically you want overload up as often as possible, but you want it up as long as possible for the times that it is up, because you want to be able to push out as much damage as possible as well. Though that fully depends on if the shorter cooldowns and having it more often means that you just get more time of it overall, equating to more damage. Again, something we'll have to see when we get the exact numbers. So next we've got Double Saber Extra Attack, or Saber Extra Attack. Essentially it gives you a 4th normal attack for your double sabers. This is actually a lot better of a change than you'd think. Up until this point, double sabers only have 3 normal attacks, and because Fighter has a skill that allows you to jump to your 4th normal if you use 2 different PAs in a combo, it wasn't as useful for double saber. Now, it's useful for double saber as well. This is great since it gives you full freedom to either use 2 PAs and then a normal attack, or 2 different PAs and a normal attack, essentially giving you the ability to hit a normal wherever you happen to be in your combo as long as you've at least used 2 PAs, making the PP regeneration much nicer. Next up we have Dagger Hit Count Up PP gain. So this one's interesting. It says recovers PP each time you hit a certain number of times with a Photon Art or Photon Blast. Can only be used with twin daggers. This is actually really strong because at the moment, one of the better ways to play Fighter is Knuckles with daggers as a multi-weapon. Essentially, you'd use Knuckles normally while you're fighting your target, but when you get it into a down state where it's going to be sitting still for a long period of time, you would spam Twin Dagger PAs. Now, Twin Dagger PAs hit a lot, so it's actually just going to help for your overall PP economy with being able to spam more. And as long as you have more PP to use, you can spam more abilities. So it'll be interesting to see how strong this is actually going to be. Basically how much effective PP you gain overall, and yeah, I'm excited actually for that specific playstyle. That's how I usually play Fighter when I'm leveling it, since it's my primary, subclass. And last but not least, we have Knuckle Arts Combo Bonus. It says, further improves the decreased PP consumption rate of Knuckle Arts Combo PP save when you unleash the first half of a Photon Art. This will be actually pretty cool. Certain combos primarily use the first half of the Photon Art specifically, so it'll make those combos even stronger. Much like the previous skill, this is going to be another situation of how much more effective PP will be provided overall to keep us in the fight, attacking as much as possible that much longer. I feel like this will be more effective for those of you guys who are primarily Knuckles users, essentially like using Knuckles for everything across the board, not, Knuckle Dagger like I am a lot of the times. This will be a much more impactful skill for you in the situation itself. Normally when you're playing Knuckles, you're not super starved for PP because a lot of times you're swinging coming attacks and things of that sort. It's only whenever your target's down, not moving, not swinging, and you're just unleashing as much damage as possible that you have to really think about your PP usage. But that wraps up Fighter. Let's move on to Ranger. So to start things off, we've got Spread Shot Auto Charge. While a welcome change for Ranger itself, it actually is a bit more interesting for players who don't primarily use Rifle as their main weapon, or who use Ranger as a subclass. At the moment, the only way to actually charge Spread Shot is to primarily use the Rifle. Now you can actually just hot swap to it, pop up a Spread Shot, and then swap back, or if you have a multi-weapon, you don't even need to swap, you just press the button and then go back to using whatever weapon it would be. From a meta perspective, I'm told that Gunner Ranger is actually a thing and has completed content fairly quickly, so this seems like a fantastic change specifically for that class combination, because I'm sure you would have either an offhand rifle or just a multi-weapon rifle to be able to pop off a Spread Shot occasionally. But moving on, we have Rifle Grenadier Quick Reload, so when you successfully dodge with a weapon action, reduces the cooldown timer for your rifle. Now, I'll be 100% honest, I didn't know that you could actually dodge with your weapon action. I knew the weapon action would move you, it would shoot, maybe they mean like move you out of the way, but I was unaware that had any iframes whatsoever. Most Rangers I see just step counter, so I'm not sure if maybe something is changing moving into the next region, or maybe Rangers just have a very, very tiny window to dodge through something using their weapon action directly, or maybe this is a mistranslation and it's attached to the step counter instead, but this will be really good for getting out more grenades, meaning a bit more damage and better PP economy. So either way, I'm here for it. Next we have Wide Range Blight Rounds. So fires a round that increases damage dealt to any part hit in a wide area of effect. This skill draws from the same number of uses and cooldown time of ordinary Blight Rounds. So if the skill works the way that I think it works, it might be broken, I'll be honest with you, when it comes to Blight Rounds. One, it draws from the same number of uses and cooldown timers, meaning I'm not sure if they mean shoot one and you get a wide range shot, or if you shoot and it uses 3 from the same number of uses that you have currently with your Blight Rounds. Technically the second one would be more balanced, and I'm sure someone has seen footage somewhere. Well, they'll go ahead and correct me in the comments, so I'm just giving you guys the idea of what I've seen so far. But if it works one way, it's going to be kind of busted in my opinion. If it works the other way, it's going to be pretty fair and balanced. Even with a situation where you're using extra bullets for a wide range shot, the next thing to think about is, can it hit one enemy more than once in separate parts? Can you possibly set up a situation where you hit both legs of an enemy with a wide range shot? So it doesn't matter which one you're attacking. Granted, you want to be hitting the same one, of course, for down, but being able to basically tag more than one spot would be super awesome. Though currently, whenever you blight round something, it moves it from spot to spot. So I don't think that would be the case. The other situation would be just being able to blight round in a chunk of enemies to be able to take them down much easier. That's going to be super awesome. We're all pretty sure that's how it's going to work. That's the whole point of it. But it's cool to think about all these other, scenarios and situations. And last but not least, Launcher Attack Short Charge. So reduce the potency of charged normal attacks, but they charge faster. This is again going to be a situation of DPS and PP economy. So does it provide extra DPS? Well, if not, does it provide enough PP to make up for the loss of DPS? It's going to depend on how that actually works out when the numbers are crunched and figured out, so stay tuned for that. So next up, we have Gunner. More or less if I was going to play a range class, this is the range class I would play. And no, it's not just because it dual wields. It also has a really, really sick set of skills, and I have 2 really, really cool camos for Gunner, so bleh, but also dual wields. So the first skill on Gunner's list is Chain Trigger Count Retain, which reads, when a chain trigger ends without a chain finisher boost, the chain number of the next chain trigger you use will start at a higher number based on the previous chain number. A bit of a tongue twister, but what they're basically saying here is that if you don't get a chance to actually use a finisher on your chain trigger, then the next chain trigger you get will start off higher based on what your last chain trigger was. this is basically falling in the lines of allowing the player more freedom in use of their chain trigger, basically not punishing them for not knowing when a target is either going to jump away or just flat out die. This more or less continues the trend from going from base game over to NGS of quality of life for gunner, where they move chain trigger from being on the target to being a part of the gunner themselves, and now they're making it so if you do have to drop a chain trigger for any reason, it's not nearly as bad to build back up and get right back into the fight again. Overall, this should make gunner a lot comfier to ramp up even faster in fights from fight to fight. Next up, we have stylish roll counter bullet. A successful dodge with a weapon action simultaneously unleashes a counterattack. Essentially, as long as you stylish roll through an attack, you get a counterattack immediately, not coming from the gunner, but actually just coming from the air towards your target. So it doesn't even interrupt your animation, which is really, really nice. And it also does build up your chain trigger, so basically have something to do if you ever have a situation where you want to build chain trigger, but you also need to take care of incoming attacks or incoming damage coming towards your character. And last but not least, we have a fairly familiar skill. Twin Machine Gun Alternate Arts PP Preservation. Decreases your PP consumption when you chain different photon arts together. Basically, this is just another skill that favors comboing photon arts together, making your effective amount of PP available much higher, which should also help with your overall DPS. I personally like these types of skills because instead of finding one specific PA to match a specific situation where you can end up spamming one PA for a long period of time, you then look for combos to match certain situations, and in some cases even just transition into other situations, which can be a lot more fluid when it comes to gameplay, and I just like it overall. So definitely a welcome change. Next up, we've got Force here, and Force has got a doozy of skills. The most actually at 5. Now, some of these skills are actually shared by other classes, so I'm not going to really go into detail on them unless I think they change up how the class plays specifically because of the class that it's on. So, I mean, that might be a lot, it might not be very much, just a heads up. To start things off, we've got Photon Flare Short Charge. Now, again, this is like the other skills that reduce the effect duration, but shorten the cooldown timer. This is going to depend on a couple of specific variables, primarily just how the actual skill itself works. With Photon Flare, you're actually getting back your PP at the end of a Photon Flare, so having a Photon Flare last a long period of time may not be very conducive to recovering all of your PP back. So it could be better to have this be a shorter cycle, but have it up more often, so there's more fluctuation back and forth with your PP economy. Now, when it comes to Force, there's a lot of talk at the moment of PP economy because of a lot of passive recovery skills that Force has. And I mean, overall, it might be something that's super useful for the class itself, or, kind of throws a monkey wrench into the entire situation and acts a bit weird. We'll have to see when we get a hold of the numbers, but I think this is going to be a pretty good change. Primarily to me personally, in most cases, I just don't have a large enough PP pool to last the entire Photon Flare, so definitely a welcome change for those of us who just kind of jump into playing Force every once in a while. Next up, we've got Foe Brand, and man, this skill was a little bit difficult to understand when I first saw it, but it turns out that I understood it completely correct, and my chat actually debated me pretty heavily when it came to this one. So the way this works is when you hit an enemy with a fire technique a certain number of times, a flame seal is engraved. When you hit with another fire technique, the seal explodes, both causing additional damage and restoring PP. I don't think I really need to explain that one. More or less, fire stonks just went up, and it's a great time for it to happen since we're going into an ice region, where likely a lot of enemies are going to be resistant to fire. This basically adds a pretty awesome chunk of PP restoration on top of Force's already natural PP regen phase it has available to it, and other skills we're going to go over in just a moment that also affect PP regen. Basically, it's just going to be more of what you want. More PP to cast more techs, and then also on top of that, more damage. It basically makes fire actually useful. I always said they either had to give fire an interesting, unique, sort of mechanic, or they just have to make it really, really good to garnish anyone actually using it, and they chose the option of making it good. At least conceptually. We don't really know what the numbers are just yet. We will soon though. Next on our list, we have Rod Technique PP Well Up. It reads that you recover PP naturally while activating techniques. However, your natural PP recovery speed is reduced. Now, Force is an absolute monster when it comes to PP regen, primarily because it has some of the most insane natural PP recovery in the game. And for those of you guys who've been on my channel, you know that while active PP recovery is active, passive PP recovery or natural PP recovery is also active. Part of the reason why I personally always thought that Force was just the better PP regen class. Some people advocated for Gunner for very specific combinations. However, active PP regen happens alongside of passive PP regen. So if you have so much passive PP regen, the active PP regen, while nice, increasing it usually isn't really worth it, since it's normally a lot less than the natural PP regen, while on top of also just gaining natural PP regen. Now, I'm not super fantastic at explaining this, but you can check out my buddy Thrift. He made a fantastic video talking about the future of what Force's meta may be like. I'll hopefully do my best to remember to leave a link in the video description or a comment pinned that you guys can check that out. We basically are more or less aligned on what we feel like Force is going to end up being. But to give a short version, essentially, with all of the passive PP regen, natural PP regen that we have access to, giving us the ability to then get more natural PP regen at more times at the cost of reducing how fast it actually is just going to be overall stonks. If you look at it, you've got Photon Flare short charge cycle, where you're going to not only cast faster, but you're also charge cast faster, but you're also going to be able to regen PP while you're charging techs, because that's already a thing for Force. Also while you're activating techs because of the skill itself. And then at the end of Photon Flare, you're going to then regen PP back yourself for a skill you have in the skill tree as well. So it's just so much recovery overall. I think it's going to be pretty crazy, where you're going to see Force's PP bar jackknife back and forth with the amount of PP they can recover, or get to a certain equilibrium where they just kind of chill in one spot. In my opinion, it's actually pretty exciting for Force, so I look forward to leveling it as I do every expansion. Next up, we have the unfortunate lesser little brother of the tech weapons, the Talus. So we've got Talus Bloom after PP gain. At the end of Talus deployment triggered by a Photon Art, you recover PP based on the number of times the technique was casted while it was deployed. What this essentially means is that when you use a Photon Art with Talus, because Talus has Photon Arts that deploy essentially cards around them to have your techniques attack in very specific directions. Whenever this ends, because it's not up all the time, this will then give you PP back based on the times a technique was cast, based on the times that you actually attacked with the technique while those were deployed. It essentially provides PP recovery for Talus users that want to primarily use Talus. Realistically, Talus only becomes a fantastic weapon to use in the very niche situation of wanting to, attack with the proper element that isn't lightning in an AoE situation very close around you. You use a Talus because of the PA, where it has all of the bolts going around you in a circle. It's very powerful, and with on top of being the proper element for attacking the enemies, it does push it over just enough over Zonde. But you can also just sit from a safe distance and spam Zonde with a rod, so it's kind of tough to say that it's going to be the thing you want to go for, like your go-to, unless you're really min-maxing and you really care that much and you really want to use Talus. But for those players who do want to play Talus, this is a fantastic change, and since if you're using Talus, you're very rarely charging any techniques whatsoever, this is nice to have. That way you can kind of level out your PP regen. Last but not least, we have Tricky Capacitor Gauge Amplifier. This just makes it so whenever your Talus is deployed due to a Photon Art, the level of your Tricky Capacitor gauge increases when you attack with the enemy's elemental weak point with a technique, essentially giving you faster Tricky Capacitors for actually using the little bolts that you have when you're using Talus to then cast your techniques. So basically trying to get you to use the actual mechanic of Talus more often while you have a Talus out. Tricky Capacitor, of course, being Talus's build-up skill that provides you with a bit of extra damage on top of regen, so it's definitely a nice welcome to the kit. While I do personally feel like Talus is in a bit of a weird spot where it just isn't really on par with Rod in most situations, it does have its place for people who really want to play Talus. You don't really feel like you're full on throwing by using the weapon. It actually does have quite a bit of benefits to using it, so definitely a good change. So next up we have Techter, and it also has 5 skills, but like I mentioned beforehand, some of these skills are shared by Force. To start things off, we have Foy Brand. We already talked about how it works, but I do want to mention a few things when it comes to these actual blots or brands or whatever they have them called, specifically whatever you want to call them. So with Techter, you don't have the ability of generating these blots, these mechanics, outside of using your compound tag. Now, it would be really cool if using your PAs that gave you elemental explosions built that up for you. So you actually had the ability to then cast a tech in between, deal a chunk of damage. I think it'd be a fantastic change to see for Techter, and it would be super awesome with Foe Brand as well. It's worth also mentioning that most likely Fomalgion will apply Foe Brand to every target it hits, meaning that it's going to be even more busted for AoE. Now onto the first Techter unique skill, we have Wand Attack Extra. So it allows you to string up to 4 normal attacks. Normally kind of boring, but actually pretty dope for Wand specifically. One, it looked like you had either hyper armor or a bit of like a guard point in front of you when you were using that 4th normal. 2, it looks really cool. And 3, the next skill that we have for it is Wand Art's Skip Attack, which after using the same PA successively, your normal attack changes through its 3rd step, meaning that you would then go from using like just PAs over and over again until you were out, and then going into normal attack to using PA, normal, to then use your 4th normal attack, which is that big hit, does extra damage, and kind of levels out your PP regen situation. So the next 2 skills we have, we basically just went over: Talus Bloom after PP gain and Tricky Capacitor Gauge Amplifier. So honestly, these are only useful for, again, situations where players really want to play Talus. The Talus Techter isn't bad per se, but technically Wand is still going to be stronger overall, even with all the issues Wand has. Now, that's not to say in every situation Wand's going to be better. It's just Wand has a really good counterattack. While targets are active and coming after you, you can get off some really nice damage using a Wand. But in most situations, it's just going to be the better choice over Talus. Talus, again, isn't really a throwing, but it's not really optimal specifically anyway. In some situations, you really don't care about optimizing. You can play off meta and still be optimal, so I don't think Talus is really a throw. It's totally okay, but it would be nice to see Talus get some love in the future. Next up, we have Braver. Everyone's favorite katana weeb stick class. Yes, I'm talking about you, Braver. Yes, I'm talking about you, Keroppi, to be honest. The favorite child of NGS, it seems. So, Braver really just got better, which is crazy if you think about what Braver currently is, to think that they made it even stronger. I'll be honest, I don't feel like stronger is even the right word. I think it's just cooler, more quality of life friendly. I can't think of anything else I would want to call it. Anyway, let's get into the skills. So first we have Brave Combat Cross Spirit. When you trigger Brave Combat, Brave Spirit also becomes active. Normally, you have to counter something to get Brave Spirit active. This just means now in situations where, let's say your target's down, there's nothing coming at you, you can't trigger Brave Spirit. If you pop Brave Combat, Brave Spirit immediately becomes active. So just winning, like I said, quality of life. Now here is where it gets kinda crazy. Katana PA combo finish. After using the 3rd step of a Katana Photon Art, your normal attack changes to a powerful strike. Yes, so if you're unaware of how Braver combos or Braver Photon Arts work, each Photon Art is actually a 3-step combo. After you use that 3rd step of the combo, you get a powerful normal attack. Normal attacks deal damage, regen PP. In the case of the Braver's Katana normal attack, it's a huge X in front of them. So it's a giant cleave, so fantastic for AoE. No problem with single target because you have a giant hitbox in front of you. You get PP regen, and funny enough, you don't even have to spam the same PA 3 times in a row. You can actually alternate PAs because it goes by each step as you're going up to your 3rd hit. Just make sure you throw in your normal as your 4th attack, and then you can go right back into it again. Honestly, it's just Katana winning. So here's the funny part, right? That skill sounds awesome, fantastic. What more could Braver ask for? There is actually more. So the next skill we have is Katana Guard Counter Plus. The way this skill works, I'm not 100% sure on. It's going to require some clarity or clarification, but basically how this reads is when you perform a guard counter, which is pressing your guard in time with an attack that's coming at you, you automatically get a counter. But when performing a guard counter, performing a normal attack unleashes an additional counter, meaning that if this works the way that it sounds and the way that it reads, pressing a normal attack after a guard counter that already deals counter damage and provides PP regen, you get another counter if you press a normal attack, which is going to do damage. So you basically get a super normal with more PP regen for countering. So you essentially get almost a 2-step counter. So I heard you like counters, so we gave you another counter after your count. You see what I mean here? It's actually kind of crazy. All jokes aside, for the whole Braver process, this is really cool. Like, this is a fantastic skill. But it shows how much it seems some weapons really are pulling ahead with interesting mechanics over others. And speaking of, let's move on to bow. So bow just got bow alternate arts PP preservation, basically decreasing your PP consumption when you chain different photon arts together. Again, this is just a skill that provides you the ability to have more effective PP as long as you're chaining skills together. So good in that aspect for PP regen, but it's one of those skills where you're just kind of, again, filling out the role of the weapon itself. Slow landing photon bow just slows the fall speed when performing a normal attack or charging a photon art. This is great for just maintaining your height when you're fighting a certain boss to be able to get just a good angle to fire your abilities at. But just like the previous ability here in this situation, it's not super interesting. It's just something that feels like it rounds out the weapon itself. You guys can kind of see the polarizing sides when it comes to these weapons, like things that just seem to round out the weapon versus things that really add interesting mechanics to the weapon itself. So bow mains, you're not really starving, but you are definitely not feasting like katana mains at the moment. So that leaves us at the very final class of this entire list, Bouncer. So to start things off, we have Feuerbrand, which is pretty understandable. Bouncers do build those blots and things of that sort, so having the ability to then detonate this is super awesome, and it's also PP regen, so fantastic for jet boots. But we've talked about Feuerbrand enough, let's move on to the next skill. Next up, we have the first of the Soaring Blade's abilities, Photon Blade Protect. So this negates enemy attacks when you use a weapon action. So I'm going to take a moment here to kind of explain the way the weapon action works for Soaring Blades because it's a bit disjointed. So weapon action has two individual states. Its state when you are using a photon art and its state when you are not using a photon art. While not using a photon art, or the way I like to refer to it as the neutral weapon action, essentially you shoot two blades in front of you. You have a small animation of some blades kind of swirling around you a little bit, but those are mostly just for show. You just shoot two blades at your target. This can happen whenever you are normal attacking, whenever you are just sprinting around, or even if you're just standing still. If you press your weapon action, you essentially just get two blades that fling at your target. Technically, this does have its own little cooldown. There's actually two of them. If you just use the weapon action on its own, it's got a cooldown of 1 second before you can do it again, where if you actually use the weapon action and then use a normal attack, specifically a normal attack, after you use a weapon action, what'll end up happening is it gives it an extra 2-second cooldown. It doesn't set the cooldown to 3 seconds, but it takes into account what your cooldown currently is and adds 2 seconds to it. This was put in place to combat a specific way that, the weapon was being used previously, but I'm not going to go too far into that. I've talked about it in tons of other videos. You guys are more than welcome to check that out, but essentially it makes it so you aren't able to multi-weapon this with other weapons and then use blades in between every single ability or any single normal attack or anything that happens very quickly to abuse high amounts of damage with Fanatic Blade. Now, whenever you use a weapon action during a PA, you have Blade Arts Parry. Now, the Blade Arts Parry is basically just a block around you, 360 block that blocks incoming damage, and it can be used one time. The way this works is whenever you start up a PA, it immediately resets your weapon action cooldown timer. So even if your cooldown timer was at the 3 seconds, or I guess 2.5 seconds realistically that it would be, or if it was at the 1 second, no matter where it was at beforehand, it then resets that timer immediately, and you can use one weapon action block during the actual PA. Realistically, this kind of sucks because in most cases you wanted to just step counter anyway because it was more damage. Well, it was just damage in general, and you really only use this when you were absolutely animation locked and couldn't get out of it, and used it for safety basically. Now that we've gone over those, it'll be better to understand the next two skills. So Photon Blade Protect negates enemy attacks when you use a weapon action, the neutral weapon action, essentially just throwing two blades in front of us. It basically makes Photon Blade Protect into a pseudo parry in a sense, because you're already dealing damage with the blades that are shot out in front of you, unless for some reason this cancels that. From what I understand, it doesn't. And and from what I've seen of the footage, it doesn't. So this basically just becomes a sort of parry. But all the things that I mentioned beforehand still apply. So if you normal attack in between, you increase its timer by 2 seconds. At least as of right now. Hopefully that gets removed in the future, because that would make this really, really unfun to use. But we'll have to deal with what we have to deal with. So I'm sure the first question that comes up, most of us have here, is what about Fanatic Blade? And you're right, that's the first thing I thought of as well. There's a good possibility that if this works the way that it's written, it might make you nearly invincible when you use Fanatic Blade, at least for those few seconds that Fanatic Blade is active. Not really making Fanatic Blade any stronger, because it would still be the same amount of power. This is just adding a negate whenever you actually use the weapon action, since Fanatic Blade allows you to use it consistently back to back. No problems there. But it does mean that Fanatic Blade is going to be pretty powerful, at least as a defensive tool. The next thing we have up here is Blade Art's Parry Counter Edge. Now this one is pretty interesting as well. Keep in mind how Blade Art's Parry works. You get one block during a PA. Well, what Counter Edge does is it actually takes, if you land that block, you get a giant blade that drops on top of your target for damage. And from what we've seen, it's a good chunk of damage. Now, some people are reporting from other pieces of footage over on the JP side that whenever you do get this Counter Edge, it essentially negates all damage for the rest of the PA. That would probably be the best case scenario of how the skill would work. On one hand, we could just remove the whole situation of only being able to use it once per PA, but we still have that 3-second situation we'd have to deal with. On the other hand, we could then reduce that actual cooldown, but if you reduce it too much, then you could spam it for everything, meaning that multi-hit attacks, you'd be damn near invulnerable, or honestly, almost anything. You could also just put in a small cooldown timer in between, like half a second or something like that, to make it so that you're not always invincible, and if you're not timing it properly, you basically get screwed over. But we don't have the drawback that Etwal Soaring Blades had in base game, where in base game, if you were just spamming your weapon action to parry an ability, you would lose your perfect attack. There's no perfect attacks in NGS, so you have to keep that in mind, which is why I'm saying that if it does actually negate the rest of the damage for the rest of your PA, that's basically a best case scenario situation in my opinion. Worst case scenario is the footage that they were looking at, the attacks just whiffed him and they didn't actually connect with the target, meaning that you could still be knocked out of it afterwards. That just means that you would essentially go for a block and then maybe step counter after that, but we'll have to get our hands on it to know for sure. Next up, we have Thrust Drive Skip Attack. This one's pretty straightforward. After you use Thrust Drive, your normal attack changes to its 4th step. This just provides overall PP economy for playing the class. Basically, whenever you pop Thrust Drive, you pop a normal afterwards. It's going to be more or less muscle memory and second nature, so super cool there. And the final skill on the list that kind of makes me a little bit jealous is Jet Sweep Jolt Short Cooldown. When you successfully dodge with a weapon action, which is extremely easy by the way, the cooldown time for Jet Sweep Jolt is reduced. Now, Jet Sweep Jolt builds up based on you attacking with normals, with PAs, as well as whenever you successfully dodge something with weapon action. Now, if you get into a situation where a target is giving you consistent damage over and over again, which happens a lot in this game, things like Next Fire Breath, or God, what's the name of that enemy with 6 arms that kind of does that punch spin tornado thing? Yeah, when he does that, you can spam, weapon action over and over again and get tons of counters. Now, if it's also going to reduce the cooldown on Jet Sweep Jolt, that just means a ton of more Jet Sweep Jolts, which are not only invulnerable, you basically have iframes when you use it, you get PP back and you deal damage. So it's pretty much just a plus all around the board. And that wraps up all the skills we have coming in the Kvaris region. As you can see, it was a lot to go over, which is why I wanted to make it its own separate video. Let me know what you guys think about these skills. Are you excited for something individually? Are you disappointed by something else? I know there's a lot of mixed feelings for certain skills, and a lot of people were really curious at what I had to say about bouncers, so I took a little bit of extra time to give you guys my full thoughts on it, on how the skill can be used, so on and so forth. Basically, the long story short, to kind of give a little bit of extra context at the very end, bouncer skills, while welcome, doesn't fix Fanatic Blade in my opinion. I think it's still a very boring skill. I still don't like the weapon action. It's better now, it's more useful, but realistically speaking, it doesn't make it feel like it plays any better. The big win here is Blade Art's Parry Counter Edge. That's fantastic. I really hope it plays the way that we're thinking it plays and just provides invulnerability at the, as long as you actually parry something. It does have a pretty heavy downside to if you miss or if you press it too soon, you basically just can't use it for the rest of the PA, so you have to deal with it a different way, but it would be super cool, and my fingers are very much crossed that it does work properly. Outside of that, realistically speaking, it just feels like it kind of completes the weapon overall. Doesn't feel like it takes us very far forward, it just feels like it's something that you really should have had a lot earlier on, but I feel like that's going to be the case with quite a few weapons, so I'm not super disappointed about that. I'm happy to see what we've gotten so far. There are some other skills I'd like to see for certain classes. For example, I don't feel like you should ever fall whenever you do a step counter. I feel like all of the melee weapons when you're doing this process, specifically melee weapons in my opinion, but all melee weapons should retain some height whenever you step counter something. That should be pretty much staple across the board in my opinion. It affects some weapons, doesn't affect others, but everyone should have the option to do this, and I think it would be a fantastic change. But that's all I've got for you guys today. If you made it through all the way to the end of the video, I know it's a long one. I appreciate you guys sticking all the way through to the end. Like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to keep up with more, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace out.